The sun was setting over the rugged landscape of Redemption Creek, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson when Savannah Hayes stumbled into town with nothing but a tattered carpet bag, a 2-month-old baby clutched to her chest, and desperation in her eyes. The year was 1875, and the frontier town nestled in the Colorado Territory was as unforgiving as the wilderness surrounding it. "Please," she begged the stern-faced woman at the boarding house. "Just one night, I can pay." Her trembling fingers fumbled with the few coins she had left, the meager remains of what her late husband had left her before pneumonia took him just weeks after their son was born. Mrs. Winters, the boarding house proprietor, glanced at the infant and then at Savannah's wedding ring. Her lips pursed into a thin line. "We don't take in women with babies, too much noise, bad for business." Her eyes narrowed. "Besides, that ring looks mighty new for a widow." Savannah's cheeks burned with shame. It was true she and Thomas had only been married briefly before his passing, wed hastily when they discovered she was with child. But the ring was real, their love had been real, and little Joseph was legitimate. Not that anyone in this town would believe her. "Please," she whispered again, clutching her son closer as he began to fuss. "We have nowhere else to go. Try the saloon," Mrs. Winters said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "They'll take anyone's money." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. With her head held high despite the tears threatening to spill, Savannah turned away and walked back into the dusty street. Night was falling fast, and the mountain air grew cold. Little Joseph's cries grew louder, drawing stares from passers-by. "Shameful," muttered a woman in a bonnet, loud enough for Savannah to hear. "Another fallen dove with her bastard." A man spat on the ground near her feet. Savannah quickened her pace, bouncing Joseph gently, trying to soothe him while searching desperately for shelter. The saloon loomed ahead, its raucous piano music and boisterous laughter spilling out into the street. She hesitated. She needed a place to stay, but not at the cost of her remaining dignity. As she stood wavering in the street, a horse's snort startled her. She turned to find herself face to face with a tall bay stallion and its rider, a broad-shouldered man in a worn leather duster, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and rough like gravel, "you look like you could use some help." Vaughn Foster had ridden into Redemption Creek with the intention of staying just long enough to resupply before continuing north to his new homestead. 3 years of driving cattle had earned him enough to buy his own land, and at 32, he was more than ready to put down roots. What he hadn't planned on was finding a young woman and her crying infant in the middle of the street, looking like the world had turned its back on them. "I'm fine," the woman said, though her quivering voice betrayed her. The baby in her arms wailed louder. Vaughn dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Forgive me for saying so, but you don't look fine, and that little one sounds hungry." The woman's green eyes flashed with a mixture of pride and desperation. "We'll manage." Vaughn glanced around at the townsfolk who were beginning to gather, their judgmental whispers carrying in the evening air. He'd seen this scenario play out in towns across the frontier. A woman alone was vulnerable prey for gossip and worse. "I'm Vaughn Foster," he said, removing his hat. "I was just heading to the hotel for a meal. Would you and your child care to join me?" He kept his voice casual, respectful. "It's just dinner, madam, and maybe they have a vacant room for you." She hesitated, clearly weighing her limited options. The baby's cries grew more insistent. "Savannah," she finally said. "Savannah Hayes, and this is Joseph." The hotel dining room fell silent when they entered. Vaughn was acutely aware of the eyes following them as he guided Savannah to a corner table. The baby continued to fuss, drawing disapproving glares from the other diners. "Perhaps I should leave," Savannah whispered, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm disrupting everyone's meal." "Let them be disrupted," Vaughn said firmly. "A hungry child has every right to cry." The waiter approached reluctantly. "Sir, perhaps the lady would be more comfortable elsewhere." Vaughn fixed the man with a steely gaze. "2 dinners, the best you've got, and some warm milk for the child." "The establishment has a reputation to maintain," the waiter persisted. Vaughn stood slowly, his 6'3" frame towering over the waiter. So do I, and I'd hate to damage yours by taking my business and my recommendations elsewhere. 2 dinners. Now, the waiter scurried away. Savannah stared at Vaughn with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. Why are you helping us? She asked quietly. Vaughn settled back in his chair. My mother raised me alone after my father was killed in a mining accident. I know what it's like. Joseph's cries escalated and Savannah rocked him desperately. I'm sorry, he's hungry and I. She trailed off, her exhaustion evident. The waiter returned with a small pitcher of warm milk. Savannah prepared a makeshift bottle using a clean handkerchief soaked in milk, a trick she'd learned from necessity. As Joseph began to quiet, she relaxed slightly. You're good with him, Vaughn observed. He's all I have, she replied simply. When their food arrived, Savannah ate with the controlled hunger of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. She told Vaughn her story between careful bites, her brief marriage to Thomas, a clerk from Boston who had followed the promise of opportunity west, his sudden illness and death, her family's refusal to take her back after she defied them to marry a man they deemed beneath her. I'm heading to my sister in Sacramento, she explained. She doesn't know I'm coming, but she was always kind. I just need to find work here for a while, save enough for the stagecoach fare. Vaughn listened, struck by her courage. When she finished speaking, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. Mrs. Hayes, he said carefully, I have a proposition for you. Savannah's face hardened immediately. Mr. Foster, if you think that I would, no, he interrupted, horrified. Nothing like that. I've purchased land about a day's ride north of here. Good land with a small cabin. I'm planning to raise horses. It's respectable work, but it'll be hard to manage alone. He took a deep breath. I need a housekeeper, someone to cook meals, keep the place in order. There's a small room off the kitchen that would suit you and your son. It's not much, but it's clean and private. Savannah studied him suspiciously. And what would you expect in return for this arrangement? Honest work for honest pay, Vaughn said firmly. 3 meals a day, a clean house. I'll provide room and board plus $5 a week. You save for your trip to Sacramento and I get a decent meal after a day's work. He paused. It's just business, Mrs. Hayes. She considered his offer, weighing her desperate situation against the risk of trusting a stranger. How do I know your intentions are honorable? You don't, Vaughn admitted. But I can get references from the bank here. I've done business with them before. Ask around about Vaughn Foster. He smiled slightly. I've got a reputation for being dull and predictable, if that helps. Despite herself, Savannah returned a small smile. I'll need to think about it, of course. I'll be here until tomorrow afternoon. When Savannah and Joseph were settled in a hotel room that Vaughn had paid for with strict instructions to the hotel manager that they were to be treated with respect, she pondered her options. A position as housekeeper would provide shelter and income, time to save for their journey. And something about Vaughn Foster's steady gaze made her believe he was telling the truth. The next morning, she found him in the hotel lobby. We accept your offer, Mr. Foster, she said formally. On a trial basis. Vaughn nodded, relieved. We'll leave at noon if that suits you. The journey to Vaughn's homestead took them through rugged terrain, following the winding path of the Eagle River. Savannah rode on a gentle mare that Vaughn had purchased specifically for her use, with Joseph secured in a sling across her chest. The baby seemed to enjoy the rhythm of the horse's gait, sleeping peacefully for most of the journey. As they rode, Vaughn pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his years as a cattle driver. Savannah found herself relaxing in his presence, his calm demeanor a balm to her frayed nerves. There it is, Vaughn said as they crested a hill late in the afternoon. Foster's Rest. Below them stretched a small valley, lush with spring grass. A modest cabin stood near a copse of aspens with a barn and corral nearby. A creek cut through the property, its water gleaming in the late-day sun. It's beautiful, Savannah breathed, genuinely impressed. It will be, Vaughn agreed. Once I get it properly established. The cabin was simple but solidly built, with 2 rooms plus the small chamber off the kitchen that would be Savannah and Joseph's quarters. The previous owner had left some furniture, a table, chairs, a bed frame in the main bedroom, and a small stove. Vaughn had arranged for basic supplies to be delivered before their arrival. "It's not much," he said apologetically as he showed her around. "It's perfect," Savannah replied, meaning it. After weeks of uncertainty, the sturdy walls of the cabin felt like a fortress of safety. That first evening, Savannah prepared a simple meal from the supplies while Vaughn tended to the horses. They ate together at the rough-hewn table, the lamplight casting a warm glow over the room. Joseph slept in a makeshift cradle that Vaughn had constructed from a wooden crate lined with blankets. "He seems to have settled in well," Vaughn observed, nodding toward the sleeping infant. "He's adaptable," Savannah said. "A necessary quality these days." Vaughn studied her across the table. "Like his mother." Their eyes met briefly before Savannah looked away, uncomfortable with the understanding she saw in his gaze. "I should clean up," she said, rising to gather the dishes. "I'll help," Vaughn offered, standing as well. "That's not necessary, it's my job." "It's your first night here. We can both manage." They worked side by side in companionable silence, and Savannah was struck by how easy it felt, this domestic routine with a man she barely knew. When the kitchen was tidy, Vaughn bade her good night and retired to his room, closing the door firmly behind him. Savannah checked on Joseph, then sat on the edge of her narrow bed, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. She was alone in a remote cabin with a man she'd met just yesterday. By all measures of propriety, it was scandalous, but for the first time in months she felt safe. Life at Foster's Rest quickly settled into a rhythm. Vaughn rose before dawn each day to tend to the horses and work the land. He was building up his herd gradually, focusing on breeding stock with good bloodlines. Savannah maintained the household, cooking, cleaning, and caring for Joseph. In the evenings, they would share a meal and conversation before retiring to their separate rooms. As spring turned to summer, the valley bloomed with wildflowers. Joseph grew stronger daily, his curious eyes tracking everything around him. Savannah found unexpected joy in watching him discover the world from the safety of their new home. Vaughn proved to be a man of his word. He treated her with unfailing respect, paid her wages punctually, and never crossed the boundaries of propriety. He was also surprisingly gentle with Joseph, fashioning toys for him and sometimes holding him while Savannah prepared dinner. One evening in late June, Savannah stepped onto the porch to call Vaughn for dinner and found him sitting on the steps, holding Joseph. The baby was reaching for Vaughn's hat, giggling as the cowboy playfully raised and lowered it just out of reach. "You're a determined little man, aren't you?" Vaughn was saying, his usually gruff voice softened. "Going to be a fine horseman someday, I can tell." "Dinner's ready," Savannah said quietly, reluctant to interrupt the tender scene. Vaughn looked up, a rare smile transforming his weather-beaten face. "This boy of yours has a grip like iron," he said, as Joseph finally captured his hat. "He'll make a fine rancher." "He seems to like you," Savannah observed, taking a seat beside them on the step. "Children are good judges of character," Vaughn replied. He hesitated, then added, "My sister's boy was about his age when I last saw him." It was the first time he'd mentioned a sister. "I didn't know you had family." "In Missouri," Vaughn nodded. "Haven't seen them in years." A shadow crossed his face. "There was a disagreement about the war." Savannah understood immediately. The Civil War had torn apart countless families. "I'm sorry." Vaughn shrugged, but his expression remained pained. "Family is complicated." "Yes," she agreed, thinking of her own parents who had disowned her. "It is." Joseph began to fuss, and Vaughn handed him back carefully. "Better feed this growing boy." As summer progressed, Savannah noticed subtle changes in their relationship. Vaughn began spending more time in the house, even when his outdoor work was done. He would read by the fire in the evenings, occasionally sharing passages from his dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans. Sometimes they would just talk, exchanging stories from their lives before Foster's Rest. Savannah learned that Vaughn had been a Union soldier, had driven cattle from Texas to Kansas, had prospected for gold in California without success. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, her brief education at a ladies' seminary, her scandalous romance with Thomas that had led to her exile from society. "You gave up a lot for love," Vaughn observed one evening. "I did," Savannah agreed. "And I would again, even knowing how it ended. Thomas gave me Joseph." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "Some things are worth any sacrifice." In July, Vaughn brought home a rocking chair he'd purchased in town. "For the baby," he explained gruffly when Savannah expressed surprise at the gift. But she often found him sitting in it with Joseph in the evenings, telling the infant stories about horses and the open range. The first signs of trouble came in early August. Savannah was hanging laundry when she noticed riders approaching 3 men she didn't recognize. She hurried inside to find Vaughn, who was repairing a bridle at the table. "Someone's coming," she said anxiously. Vaughn moved to the window, his posture tense. "Stay inside with Joseph," he instructed, reaching for his rifle. The men reined in their horses in the yard. Their leader, a sallow-faced man with a scraggly beard, called out, "Foster, come on out here." Vaughn stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "Heard you got yourself a woman," the man said, his tone insinuating, "and a bastard to boot." Savannah, watching through the window with Joseph clutched to her chest, saw Vaughn's shoulders stiffen. "Mrs. Hayes is my housekeeper," he said evenly, "and I'd appreciate you showing respect when speaking of her and her son." The men exchanged smirks. "Housekeeper, is it? That what they're calling it these days?" "State your business or move on," Vaughn said, his voice deadly quiet. "Just being neighborly," the leader said. "Welcoming the new whore to the valley." Vaughn's rifle came up smoothly. "I won't ask again." The men tensed, hands hovering near their sidearms. For a heart-stopping moment, Savannah thought shooting would erupt. Then the leader raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, Foster. No need to get riled over a woman of her reputation." He spat on the ground. "Just letting you know that decent folks around here don't take kindly to your arrangement." "Noted," Vaughn said coldly. "Now get off my land." The men wheeled their horses around, but the leader called back over his shoulder, "This ain't over, Foster. Valley's got standards." When they were gone, Vaughn came inside, his face grim. "Are you all right?" Savannah nodded, though she was shaking. "Who were they?" "Trouble," Vaughn said simply. "The leader's Silas Harmon, owns the spread south of here, been trying to buy this land for years." "And now he's using me to pressure you," Savannah said, understanding dawning. "My reputation is tarnishing yours." Vaughn set his rifle down carefully. "Your reputation is no one's business but your own." "But they'll keep coming," she persisted. "Maybe I should leave." "Take Joseph to Sacramento now." "Is that what you want?" Savannah looked around the cabin that had become home at Vaughn, who had become something more than an employer. "No," she admitted, "but I won't bring trouble to your door." Vaughn moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "Savannah," he said, using her given name for the first time, "this is your home for as long as you want it to be. I won't let Harmon or anyone else drive you away." His words warmed her, even as worry gnawed at her heart. She knew how quickly gossip could turn to violence on the frontier. And now she had more than herself to worry about. She had Joseph and Vaughn. The incident with Harmon marked a turning point. Vaughn began teaching Savannah to shoot, insisting she know how to defend herself and Joseph if necessary. They practiced with his revolver behind the barn, Savannah gradually overcoming her fear of the weapon. "Good," Vaughn praised when she hit the target 3 times in succession. "You're a natural. Let's hope I never need to use it," Savannah replied, handing the gun back carefully. Vaughn's hand covered hers briefly as he took the revolver. "Better to have skills you don't need than need skills you don't have." The brief contact sent a flutter through Savannah's stomach, a sensation she hadn't felt since Thomas's courtship. She pulled away quickly, confused by her reaction. That night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Joseph asleep inside, Savannah found the courage to ask a question that had been on her mind. "Vaughn, why did you really offer me this position? The truth." He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his eyes on the distant mountains. When I saw you in town that night with Joseph in your arms and the whole world against you, something in me recognized something in you." He paused. "Loneliness, maybe, determination, I don't know." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "I do know that hiring you was the best decision I've made since buying this land." Savannah's heart quickened. Even with Harmon causing trouble, Harmon was always going to cause trouble, Vaughn said dismissively. "He wants what isn't his." "And what do you want?" Savannah asked softly. Vaughn's gaze was steady. "Peace, a home, someone to share it with." The implications of his words hung in the air between them. Savannah looked away first, overwhelmed by the emotions his simple statement had evoked. "It's getting cold," she said, rising from her chair. "We should go in." Vaughn nodded, respecting her retreat. "I'll be along shortly." Inside, Savannah checked on Joseph, then sat on her bed, heart racing. She had come to Foster's Rest seeking temporary shelter, a stepping stone on the way to Sacramento. But somewhere along the way, the cabin and its taciturn owner had become home. The thought of leaving filled her with a sense of loss she hadn't anticipated. And there was the way her pulse quickened when Vaughn was near, the comfort she found in his steady presence, the admiration she felt watching him with Joseph. Was she falling in love again? The possibility terrified her. She had loved and lost once. She wasn't sure she could survive it a second time. The following Sunday, Vaughn surprised her by suggesting they attend church in the nearest town, a small settlement called Pine Ridge about an hour's ride away. "Why?" Savannah asked, suspicious of his sudden interest in religion. "Thought it might be good for Joseph to be around other folks," Vaughn said. "And for you too." Savannah hesitated. "What about Harmon and his gossip?" "Pine Ridge isn't Harmon's territory," Vaughn assured her. "Besides, it's time people saw the truth about us, not his version." The truth. Savannah wasn't sure she knew what that was anymore. Pine Ridge was smaller than Redemption Creek but boasted a proper church with a steeple. As Vaughn helped Savannah down from her horse, Joseph secured in his sling, she noted the curious glances from churchgoers filing into the white clapboard building. "Maybe this was a mistake," she whispered. "Trust me," Vaughn said, offering his arm. They entered the church together, Vaughn nodding politely to those who stared. The minister, a young man with kind eyes, approached them immediately. "Welcome," he said warmly. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Reverend Clark." "Vaughn Foster," Vaughn replied, shaking the minister's hand. "This is Mrs. Hayes and her son Joseph." Savannah noted the careful introduction, no implied relationship between them, just simple facts. The Reverend smiled at Joseph. "A fine-looking boy," he said, tickling Joseph's chin. "How old is he?" 6 months, Savannah replied, touched by the man's genuine interest. "God's greatest blessings often come in the smallest packages," the Reverend observed. "Please join us." They took a seat toward the back, and Savannah was acutely aware of the whispers and glances directed their way. But the service itself was peaceful, the sermon focused on compassion and judging, not lest ye be judged. Savannah found herself relaxing, Joseph contentedly chewing on his fist in her lap. After the service, several women approached, cooing over Joseph. One, a friendly-faced woman introduced as Mrs. Clark, the Reverend's wife, was particularly welcoming. "We have a sewing circle on Wednesdays," she told Savannah. "You and the little one would be most welcome." Savannah glanced at Vaughn, who nodded encouragingly. "Thank you," she said. "I'd like that." As they rode home, Savannah felt lighter than she had in months. "That was nice," she admitted. "Thank you." Vaughn smiled, the expression transforming his usually solemn face. "Sometimes people just need to see the truth for themselves." "And what is the truth, Vaughn?" Savannah asked, emboldened by the successful outing. He considered her question seriously. "That you're a good mother doing her best, that Joseph is a fine boy who deserves respect, that appearances aren't always what they seem." It wasn't quite the answer Savannah had hoped for, but it was honest. And honesty was something she had come to value highly in their relationship. The following Wednesday, Vaughn drove Savannah and Joseph to Pine Ridge in the wagon he used for supplies. The sewing circle met in the church hall, and Savannah entered nervously, uncertain of her reception. Mrs. Clark greeted her warmly, introducing her to the dozen or so women gathered around a quilt frame. Most were welcoming, though a few remained aloof. Savannah sat with Joseph on her lap, joining the women in their work while they chatted about local news and shared recipes. "Your husband seems like a good man," one woman commented, nodding toward the window where Vaughn could be seen loading supplies into the wagon. "Oh, Mr. Foster isn't my husband," Savannah clarified quickly. "I'm his housekeeper." The woman looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I just assumed." "It's all right," Savannah assured her. "He's been very kind to us." Mrs. Clark deftly changed the subject, but Savannah noticed the speculative glances exchanged among some of the women. She focused on her stitching, reminding herself that their arrangement was honest, if unconventional. When the meeting concluded, Savannah thanked Mrs. Clark for her hospitality. "You're always welcome here," the minister's wife said sincerely. "Both of you." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Some of the ladies were wondering about your circumstances." Savannah stiffened. "I was widowed shortly after Joseph was born," she said, the familiar story coming easily now. "Mr. Foster offered me employment when I had nowhere else to turn." Mrs. Clark nodded, her expression compassionate. "That's what I thought. Don't worry about the gossips, Mrs. Hayes. Those of us who matter can see the truth." The ride home was quiet, Savannah lost in thought. Vaughn respected her silence, focusing on the road ahead. It wasn't until they were nearly home that she spoke. "They thought we were married," she said. Vaughn glanced at her. "That bother you?" "No," she admitted. "It just made me realize how strange our arrangement must seem to others." "Does it seem strange to you?" he asked carefully. Savannah considered the question. "Not anymore. It feels right." Vaughn's hands tightened on the reins. "I'm glad." That night, after Joseph was asleep, Vaughn brought out a bottle of whiskey he kept for special occasions. He poured a small amount for each of them, and they sat by the fire, the autumn chill making the warmth welcome. "To new friends in Pine Ridge," Vaughn toasted. Savannah sipped the fiery liquid, grimacing slightly. "It was nice to talk with other women. I've been lonely for that, I think." "You should go back next week," Vaughn encouraged. "It's good for you to have companions besides an old cowboy and a baby." "You're not old," Savannah protested with a smile. "And you're more than just my employer now, Vaughn. You're my friend." He held her gaze over the rim of his glass. "Is that all I am to you, Savannah, a friend?" The directness of his question took her breath away. She set down her glass carefully. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I'm afraid to know." Vaughn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Fear's a natural thing, keeps us alive sometimes." He took another sip of whiskey. "But sometimes it keeps us from living." Savannah thought about his words long after they had said goodnight and retired to their separate rooms. Was fear holding her back? Fear of loss, of judgment, of having her heart broken again? Or was it something else, the sense that loving Vaughn would mean finally letting go of Thomas? She fell asleep thinking of two men. One a fading memory, the other a living, breathing presence just beyond her door. September brought the first hints of fall to the valley, the aspen leaves beginning their transformation from green to gold. Joseph, now crawling energetically, explored the cabin with determined curiosity, kept in check by Savannah's vigilance and Vaughn's hastily constructed barriers at the stairs and fireplace. One evening, as Savannah prepared dinner, Joseph pulled himself up on Vaughn's chair, standing wobbly but proud. "Vaughn, look," she called, excitement in her voice. Vaughn turned from the fire he was stoking, his face lighting up at the sight. "Well, look at you, standing like a man," he said, crouching down to Joseph's level. Joseph grinned, showing his 4 tiny teeth, and let go of the chair. For a breathless moment he stood unassisted, then took one faltering step toward Vaughn before tumbling forward. Vaughn caught him easily, swinging him up into his arms. "Did you see that?" he asked Savannah, his voice filled with pride. "He walked, his first step," Savannah confirmed, tears springing to her eyes unexpectedly. "And it was to you." Vaughn's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of profound tenderness as he gazed at the child in his arms. "Smart boy," he said softly. "Knows who's got the sweetest treats," Savannah laughed. "So you're the one who's been giving him sugar." Just a taste now and then, Vaughn admitted. Can't blame a man for wanting to be the favorite. You already are, Savannah said without thinking. When Vaughn's eyes snapped to hers, she added hastily, his favorite, I mean. He lights up whenever you enter the room. Vaughn bounced Joseph gently, but his eyes remained on Savannah. And his mother, who's her favorite? The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Savannah opened her mouth to respond, though she wasn't sure what she would say when Joseph squealed and reached for her, breaking the tension. Dinner's almost ready, she said, taking Joseph from Vaughn. Their hands brushed in the exchange, and the now familiar flutter returned to her stomach. That night, after both Joseph and Vaughn were asleep, Savannah took out the small daguerreotype of Thomas that she kept wrapped in a handkerchief. His young face smiled back at her, frozen in time. She traced the outline of his features with her finger. I miss you, she whispered to the image. But I think I'm ready to let you go, to move forward. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I hope you understand. She tucked the picture away, a bittersweet sense of peace settling over her. Thomas would always be Joseph's father, would always hold a place in her heart. But her life continued, and her heart, it seemed, had room for new love. The question was whether she had the courage to embrace it. October brought the cattle roundup, with neighboring ranchers working together to gather their herds before winter. Vaughn was gone from dawn till dusk for several days, returning exhausted but satisfied with the work. Savannah kept dinner warm for him, listening to his stories of the day's events as he ate. On the final evening of the roundup, Vaughn returned later than usual. Savannah had put Joseph to bed and was beginning to worry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She opened the door to find Vaughn dismounting slowly, his movements stiff. You're late, she said, relief making her voice sharper than intended. Had some trouble, he replied, leading his horse toward the barn. Savannah noticed then that he was favoring his left side. You're hurt, it's nothing, just a fall. She followed him to the barn, watching as he grimaced while removing the saddle. Let me see, she insisted, lighting a lantern. Vaughn sighed but stopped resisting. Harmon's bull got mixed in with my herd. When I tried to cut it out, my horse spooked and I took a tumble. Bull decided to make sure I stayed down. Savannah's heart raced with fear at his matter-of-fact description. Did it gore you? Just bruised my ribs. Maybe cracked one. He unbuttoned his shirt reluctantly, revealing an angry purple bruise spreading across his left side. Savannah gasped. Vaughn, you need a doctor. No doctors, he said firmly. Just need rest and maybe some of that liniment in the kitchen cabinet. She helped him to the house, settling him in his chair by the fire before retrieving the liniment and clean bandages. Kneeling beside him, she carefully applied the strong-smelling ointment to his ribs, trying to ignore the intimacy of the moment and the way his muscles tensed beneath her touch. You should have been more careful, she scolded gently, wrapping the bandage around his torso. Wasn't planning on getting knocked down by a 2-ton bull, Vaughn replied, his voice strained. Harmon did this deliberately, Savannah said, anger rising as she secured the bandage. He let his bull loose in your herd, knowing it would cause trouble. Vaughn caught her hand as she finished, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Don't go borrowing trouble, could have been an accident. You don't believe that any more than I do. His blue eyes studied her face. No, I don't, but getting angry won't heal my ribs or solve the problem of Harmon. Savannah became acutely aware of their position, her kneeling between his legs, his hand holding hers, his shirt open revealing his muscled chest. She pulled away abruptly, gathering the medical supplies. You should eat something, she said, moving toward the kitchen. Savannah, his voice stopped her. Thank you for taking care of me. She turned back, finding his gaze steady on hers. That's what we do, isn't it? Take care of each other. A slow smile spread across his face. Yes, madam. That's exactly what we do. The next morning, Vaughn could barely get out of bed, his ribs too painful for movement. Savannah brought him breakfast on a tray, then helped him to a sitting position, propped up with pillows. This is humiliating, he grumbled as she adjusted the pillows behind him. Being cared for is nothing to be ashamed of, she replied. Everyone needs help sometimes. Not me, he insisted stubbornly. There's work to be done, horses to feed. I can manage the morning feed, Savannah said. I've watched you enough times. Vaughn looked skeptical. The bay stallion is ornery. Better wait till I can do it. Contrary to what you might think, Mr. Foster, I am quite capable of handling an ornery stallion. She raised an eyebrow meaningfully. I've had plenty of practice lately. That surprised a laugh out of him, which he immediately regretted as pain shot through his side. Point taken, he gasped. Savannah and Joseph spent the morning tending to the horses, the baby secured in his sling while she distributed hay and filled water troughs. The bay stallion was indeed ornery, but she spoke to him firmly and kept a respectful distance, completing the task without incident. When they returned to the cabin, they found Vaughn attempting to get dressed. "What are you doing?" Savannah demanded. "Can't stay in bed all day," he said through gritted teeth. "Need to check the north pasture fence." "The fence can wait," she insisted, helping him back to the bed despite his protests. "You'll do yourself more harm than good pushing too hard." Vaughn subsided reluctantly. "Never been good at sitting still." "Then let me bring you a book, or you can play with Joseph. He's been missing your attention." At the mention of Joseph, Vaughn's expression softened. "Bring the boy in. At least I can be useful as a playmate." Savannah settled Joseph on the bed beside Vaughn, where the baby immediately began grabbing for the buttons on Vaughn's nightshirt. She left them to their play, Vaughn's deep voice rumbling through a story about a clever horse that outwitted a wolf. For 3 days, Vaughn was largely confined to bed or his chair by the fire. Savannah managed the ranch chores, caring for both man and child with quiet efficiency. On the 4th morning, she woke to find Vaughn already up and dressed, moving stiffly but determined. "Your ribs can't possibly be healed," she protested over breakfast. "Healed enough," he replied, sipping his coffee. "Winter's coming, can't afford to lose any more days." Savannah knew arguing was futile. "At least let me help with the heavier tasks," Vaughn considered, then nodded. "Fair enough." They worked together throughout the day, Savannah handling what Vaughn could not while he focused on less physically demanding tasks. Joseph watched from a blanket spread on the grass, surrounded by toys Vaughn had carved for him. As the sun began to set, Vaughn stopped to watch Joseph, who was attempting to stack wooden blocks. "He's getting bigger every day," he observed. "Soon he'll be running all over the place." "I know," Savannah said, pride and a touch of melancholy in her voice. "They grow so fast." Vaughn turned to her, his expression serious. "Have you given any more thought to Sacramento, your sister?" The question caught her off guard. "Not recently." "Why?" "Just wondering about your plans," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Winter's a hard time to travel, but come spring, the roads will be clear." "Are you asking me to leave?" Savannah's heart clenched at the thought. "No," Vaughn said quickly. "God, no, I'm asking what you want." Savannah looked at Joseph, then at the cabin that had become home, and finally at Vaughn, the man who had changed everything. "I want to stay," she said simply. "If you'll have us." Relief washed over Vaughn's face. "I was hoping you'd say that." They stood in silence for a moment, the meaning of her decision hanging between them. Then Joseph toppled his block tower and began to cry, and the moment passed as they both moved to comfort him. That night, after Joseph was asleep, Vaughn joined Savannah on the porch despite the cold. He handed her a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it." Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a silver locket. Savannah lifted it carefully, opening it to find it empty. "It was my mother's," Vaughn explained. "Thought maybe you could put a lock of Joseph's hair inside." Touched beyond words, Savannah closed her fingers around the locket. "Vaughn, I can't accept this." "Sure you can," he said simply, "but it's a family heirloom." "Exactly." He took a deep breath. "Savannah, I need to say something, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish before responding." She nodded, her heart beginning to race. "When you and Joseph came into my life, I wasn't looking for a family. I was content to build this place alone, to make my own way." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But now I can't imagine this home without you in it, without Joseph's laughter, without your cooking, without our talks in the evening." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not the most eloquent man, but I know what I feel. I love you, Savannah. I love Joseph like he was my own, and if you'll have me, I'd like to make what we have official. I'd like to be your husband and Joseph's father in every way that matters." Savannah sat perfectly still, tears filling her eyes. For months, she had been fighting her growing feelings, telling herself it was gratitude, convenience, practicality. But hearing Vaughn speak so plainly of love freed something inside her. "Joseph already thinks of you as his father," she said softly. "He took his first steps toward you. He reaches for you when he's hurt or scared." She met Vaughn's gaze. "And I've been falling in love with you too, so gradually I hardly noticed until it was already done." Vaughn's face transformed with joy. He reached for her hand and folding it in his. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Savannah whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he kissed her gently, his lips warm despite the cold night air. Savannah leaned into the kiss, her free hand coming up to touch his face. When they parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what? For giving me a family." The first snow fell 2 weeks later, blanketing the valley in white. Savannah and Vaughn had agreed to wait until spring for their wedding, when travel would be easier for the few guests they wished to invite. But their relationship had shifted, growing more intimate though still respectful of traditional boundaries. They attended church in Pine Ridge together each Sunday, now openly as an engaged couple. The community had largely accepted them, especially after Reverend Clark announced their intention to marry. Mrs. Clark had organized the women of the sewing circle to create a wedding quilt, each square representing a blessing for their union. One Sunday in early December, they returned from church to find riders approaching the cabin Harmon and 4 of his men. Vaughn immediately helped Savannah down from the wagon, positioning himself between her and the approaching riders. "Get inside with Joseph," he said quietly. "No," Savannah replied, adjusting Joseph on her hip. "We face this together." Harmon reined in his horse, his gaze moving between them with undisguised contempt. "Well, if it isn't the happy family," he sneered. "Heard you're making it official, Foster, buying the cow after getting the milk for free all these months." Vaughn's hand moved to his holster. "State your business or leave, Harmon." "Just delivering a message," Harmon said, his tone deceptively casual. "Valley's changing, railroads coming through, land values are going up." He looked around the property with covetous eyes. "Your little spread is standing in the way of progress." "My land isn't for sale," Vaughn said flatly. "Everything's for sale at the right price," Harmon countered. "I'm prepared to be generous. $5,000, that's twice what you paid." "Not interested," Harmon's face hardened. "Don't be a fool, Foster. Take the money and go somewhere else. Somewhere people won't know about your unusual family arrangements." Savannah stepped forward, Joseph secure in her arms. "Mr. Harmon, we're to be married in the spring. There's nothing unusual about our family." "A rushed wedding doesn't erase the months you've lived here in sin," Harmon said coldly. "People have long memories." "The only sin here is your harassment," Vaughn replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now get off my land before I forget my manners in front of my fiancée." Harmon's eyes narrowed. "Think carefully, Foster. This is your only chance at a peaceful solution." He wheeled his horse around. "I'll give you until the new year to reconsider." As they rode away, Savannah turned to Vaughn, her face pale. What did he mean by peaceful solution? Vaughn's expression was grim. "Nothing good." He put his arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the cabin. "But don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you or Joseph." "It's not just us I'm worried about," Savannah said, leaning into his embrace. "Harmon seems desperate for this land." "The railroad changes everything," Vaughn explained as they entered the warmth of the cabin. "If it comes through the valley, whoever owns the land where they build the station will make a fortune, and Harmon thinks that should be him. Harmon thinks everything should be his." Vaughn took Joseph from her arms, bouncing the baby gently. "But this land is our future, our son's inheritance. I won't give it up without a fight. Our son." The words sent a wave of emotion through Savannah. In just a few months, Vaughn had gone from stranger to provider to friend to beloved, and now he claimed Joseph as his own without hesitation. "Then we'll fight together," she said firmly. The weeks leading to Christmas were tense. with Vaughn installing new locks on the doors and keeping his rifle closer at hand. But they also brought moments of joy as they prepared for their first Christmas as a family. Vaughn cut a small pine tree from the ridge above the cabin, and Savannah decorated it with paper ornaments and strings of dried berries. On Christmas Eve, after Joseph was asleep in his crib, a proper one that Vaughn had purchased in town, they exchanged gifts by the fire. Savannah had knitted Vaughn a scarf from wool she'd spun herself and embroidered handkerchiefs with his initials. He gave her a leather-bound journal and a silver pen. "For your thoughts," he explained. "You have a way with words, seems a shame to keep them locked inside." His thoughtfulness touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "I've never had anything so fine." "There's something else," Vaughn said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a simple gold band. "I know we agreed to wait until spring for the wedding, but I thought you should have this now, as a promise." Savannah's breath caught as he took her left hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "It was my grandmother's," he told her. "Plain but solid, like my feelings for you." "It's beautiful," she whispered, admiring how the gold caught the firelight. Vaughn's thumb caressed the back of her hand. "Harmon was right about one thing: people do have long memories. I want them to remember us as a family that stood together, that built something lasting." He looked into her eyes. "I want Joseph to grow up knowing his parents chose each other, chose him, chose this life together." Savannah leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her love and hope into the gesture. When they parted, she said, "Why wait until spring? Let's marry now before the new year." Surprise and delight crossed Vaughn's face. "Are you sure? What about the wedding quilt, the guests?" "I don't need those things," Savannah said with certainty. "I just need you and Joseph. We can ask Reverend Clark to perform a simple ceremony." Vaughn pulled her close, his arms strong around her. "I'd marry you tonight if I could," he murmured into her hair. They were married 3 days later in the Pine Ridge Church, with only Reverend and Mrs. Clark as witnesses and Joseph dressed in his finest clothes. Savannah wore her best dress, adorned with a sprig of holly Mrs. Clark had insisted on pinning to her collar. Vaughn looked handsome in his clean shirt and new vest, his hair slicked back with water. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When Reverend Clark pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to Savannah's eyes. Then he lifted Joseph from Mrs. Clark's arms and held him high. "This is my son," he declared proudly, bringing the giggling baby to his chest. "Joseph Foster." The Reverend's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I've never seen a more beautiful family," she said sincerely. They celebrated with a simple meal at the parsonage before riding home through the snow, Joseph bundled warmly between them on the wagon seat. As they approached Foster's Rest, Savannah was struck by how different it looked from the day she had first arrived, not just because of the snow covering the landscape, but because it now truly felt like home. Vaughn helped her down from the wagon, then lifted Joseph into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "It's good to be home," she replied, linking her arm through his as they walked toward the cabin. That night, after putting Joseph to bed, they stood together in the doorway of Vaughn's bedroom, now their bedroom. Savannah felt a flutter of nervousness despite her love for Vaughn. "We don't have to rush anything," he said gently, reading her hesitation. "It's not that," she assured him. "It's been a long time." Vaughn took her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world." His patience and understanding banished her nerves. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, a kiss that deepened as he pulled her close. They moved into the room together, closing the door on the world outside, beginning their life as husband and wife in earnest. New Year's Day dawned clear and cold, with sunlight sparkling on the snow-covered valley. Savannah woke in Vaughn's arms, a contentment she had never known suffusing her being. This was what it meant to be truly loved, to be cherished, respected, desired. They rose and dressed, sharing secret smiles as they prepared breakfast. Joseph, sitting in the high chair Vaughn had crafted for him, babbled happily and reached for his new father. "Papa," he said clearly, his first real word. Vaughn froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Did he just? He did, Savannah confirmed, her heart full to bursting. He called you Papa. Vaughn set down his cup and went to Joseph, lifting him from the high chair. That's right, son, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm your papa. Savannah watched them, her husband and her son, marveling at how completely their lives had intertwined. Joseph might not have Vaughn's blood, but he had his heart, which was far more important. The sound of horses approaching broke the moment. Vaughn handed Joseph to Savannah and moved to the window, his expression darkening. Harmon, he said grimly, and his men. Savannah's happiness curdled into fear. What do they want? It's January 1st, Vaughn reminded her. Harmon's deadline for our answer about the land. He reached for his gun belt. Take Joseph to the back room and stay there. Vaughn, please, Savannah, I can't protect you both if you're in the line of fire. Reluctantly, she carried Joseph to their bedroom, closing the door but leaving it cracked enough to hear what transpired. She held Joseph close, whispering soothing words despite her racing heart. Through the crack, she saw Vaughn open the front door, standing on the porch with his hand near his holster. Harmon's voice carried clearly in the cold air. Time's up, Foster. What's your answer? Same as before, Vaughn replied steadily. The land's not for sale. That's unfortunate, Harmon said. Very unfortunate indeed. Is that a threat? Vaughn's voice was dangerously quiet, just stating facts, railroads coming whether you like it or not. Smart man would take the money and move on. I am moving on, Vaughn said, with my wife and son right here on our land. There was a pause, then Harmon spoke again, his tone changed. Wife, you actually married her. On December 28th, Vaughn confirmed. Reverend Clark officiated. Another pause. Well, that changes things, Harmon said, sounding less certain. Marriage makes it respectable. It was always respectable, Vaughn replied. Now it's legal too. Savannah heard shuffling, murmured conversation among Harmon's men, then Harmon spoke again. 8,000. Final offer. Not for sale at any price, Vaughn said firmly. This land is my son's inheritance. You're a stubborn fool, Foster. Maybe so, but I'm a stubborn fool who knows what matters. Family, home, things you can't buy with railroad money, more murmuring among the men. Then, to Savannah's surprise, the sound of horses moving away. She opened the door wider, Joseph still in her arms, and saw Vaughn watching the riders depart. They're leaving? She asked incredulously. Vaughn turned, relief evident on his face. Seems so. But why? What changed? Vaughn came to her, putting his arm around her waist. I'm not sure. Maybe Harmon has limits after all, or maybe he realized he was outnumbered. Outnumbered? There were 5 of them and 1 of you. Vaughn smiled slightly. No, there were 5 of them and 3 of us, a family. Sometimes that's the strongest force there is. Joseph reached for Vaughn, who took him easily. Papa, the baby said again, patting Vaughn's cheek. That's right, son, Vaughn replied, kissing the top of Joseph's head. Papa's here, and I'm not going anywhere. They learned the full story from Reverend Clark the following Sunday. Harmon had approached him after hearing of the marriage, demanding to know if it was true. The Reverend had not only confirmed it, but had shown Harmon the marriage certificate and registry. He seemed most disturbed by the legitimization of your family, Reverend Clark explained after the service. Apparently, his main tactic for pressuring you involved spreading rumors about Mrs. Foster's Savannah's character, which no longer held water once we were properly married, Vaughn concluded. Precisely. A married woman with a child and a respectable husband is beyond reproach in the eyes of the community. The Reverend smiled. It seems Mr. Harmon's influence was not as great as he believed. Several of his own men were uncomfortable with his tactics against a proper family. So he's given up, Savannah asked hopefully. I wouldn't say that, the Reverend cautioned, but his options are more limited now and there's more. He lowered his voice. The Railroad Commission has already decided on the route. It will pass through the valley, but the station will be built on the eastern edge, nowhere near your property or Harmon's. Vaughn laughed, a deep, joyous sound. So all his scheming was for nothing. It appears so, the Reverend agreed. Though I'd still advise caution. Defeated men can be dangerous. But Harmon made no further moves against them. As winter slowly gave way to spring, they heard he had sold his ranch and moved west to Nevada, chasing new opportunities. With the threat removed, Vaughn and Savannah focused on building their life together. The horses Vaughn had carefully bred attracted buyers from as far away as Denver, establishing Foster's Rest as a respected horse ranch. Savannah began keeping a journal as Vaughn had suggested, recording their daily life and Joseph's growth. By the time summer returned to the valley, Joseph was walking confidently and adding new words to his vocabulary daily. Mama and Papa remained his favorites, bringing smiles to his parents' faces each time he uttered them. On the anniversary of Savannah's arrival at Foster's Rest, Vaughn surprised her with a picnic by the creek. Joseph played on a blanket nearby as they ate, occasionally bringing them stones or flowers he found fascinating. "Hard to believe it's only been a year," Vaughn remarked, watching their son toddle after a butterfly. "Feels like you've always been here." "In a way, I think I was always meant to be here," Savannah replied, leaning against his shoulder. "All the hardships, all the uncertainty, they were leading me to you and this place." Vaughn's arm tightened around her. "Do you ever regret not continuing to Sacramento, not finding your sister?" "No," Savannah said honestly. "I've found my home, though I did write to her after we married, told her where we are if she ever wants to visit." "You did?" Vaughn looked surprised. "You never mentioned it." "I wanted to close that chapter properly," she explained. "To let her know I'm happy that Joseph and I are well cared for. Whether she responds or not doesn't matter now." Vaughn nodded, understanding. "You've given me so much, Savannah. A son, a home that's more than just a building, a purpose. And you've given me safety, respect, love," she replied. "Things I didn't dare hope for when I stumbled into Redemption Creek that night." Joseph came running back to them, a wildflower clutched in his chubby fist. "Mama," he exclaimed, thrusting the flower toward Savannah. "Pretty?" "Yes, it is pretty," she agreed, accepting the slightly crushed bloom. "Thank you, my love." Joseph turned to Vaughn expectantly. "Papa, up," Vaughn obliged, lifting the boy high above his head before settling him on his shoulders. Joseph squealed with delight, his small hands gripping Vaughn's hair. "Careful there, Cowboy," Vaughn laughed. "Your old Papa needs that hair." "Papa old," Joseph repeated solemnly, causing both adults to laugh. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, they packed up their picnic and headed home. Joseph, tired from his adventures, fell asleep in Vaughn's arms before they reached the cabin. Vaughn laid him gently in his bed, and he and Savannah stood watching their son sleep, his face peaceful in the fading light. "I have something to tell you," Savannah whispered, taking Vaughn's hand and placing it on her stomach. "Joseph will have a brother or sister come winter." Joy spread across Vaughn's face. "Are you sure?" "As sure as a woman can be," she confirmed. "Doctor Miller confirmed it when we were in town yesterday." Vaughn pulled her into a fierce embrace, mindful of the sleeping child nearby. "I love you, Savannah Foster," he murmured against her hair, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "My cowboy who lifted my baby and called him son." Outside, the last light of day gilded the valley that had become their home. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Savannah and Vaughn Foster stood at the threshold of their future, their love a beacon guiding them forward, their family the legacy they would leave to the wild and beautiful land that had brought them together. 5 years later, Foster's Rest had grown into one of the most prosperous horse ranches in Colorado Territory. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Vaughn's breeding program had produced horses sought after throughout the West, and Savannah's garden supplied much of their food plus extra to sell in town. Joseph, now 6, was joined by his sister Mary, age 4, and brother Thomas, just turning 2. The children filled the house with laughter and the occasional squabble, growing strong and confident under their parents' loving guidance. On summer evenings, the family would often gather on the porch after dinner. This particular evening, Vaughn sat in his rocking chair with Thomas on his lap, while Mary leaned against Savannah's skirts, listening to Joseph read haltingly from his primer. You're getting better every day, Vaughn praised when Joseph finished. Soon you'll be reading those adventure books all by yourself. Joseph beamed at his father's approval. Miss Jenkins says I'm the best reader in my class. That's because Mama and Papa work with you every night, Mary pointed out pragmatically. When will I get to go to school? Next year, Savannah promised, smoothing her daughter's dark hair so like Vaughn's. When you're 5. Thomas, not to be left out, patted Vaughn's face to get his attention. Papa horse, he demanded, his current favorite word. Tomorrow, little man, Vaughn promised. Papa will take you to see the new foal tomorrow. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Savannah looked at her family, at the children they had created together, at the man who had saved her when she was at her lowest, who had loved Joseph as his own from the beginning and felt a profound sense of gratitude. What are you thinking about? Vaughn asked, noticing her contemplative expression. About how far we've come, she replied. About how perfectly things turned out despite all the challenges. Vaughn reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help a woman and her baby on a cold night in Redemption Creek. Best decision I ever made, accepting help from a stranger with kind eyes, Savannah countered. Joseph looked up from his book. Tell us the story again, Papa, about how you found us. It was a favorite bedtime tale, though the children knew it by heart. Vaughn chuckled. Well, I was just passing through this little town, minding my own business, when I saw the prettiest woman I'd ever laid eyes on, standing in the street with a tiny baby in her arms. As Vaughn's deep voice recounted their beginning, embellished slightly for the children's enjoyment, Savannah closed her eyes briefly, remembering the desperation of that night and the courage it had taken to trust this man. How differently things might have turned out if she had refused his help, if he had ridden past without stopping. Life was full of such moments. She reflected crossroads where a single decision could alter everything that followed. She had chosen love and trust over fear, and Vaughn had chosen compassion and responsibility over convenience. Together, they had built something beautiful from those choices. And then, Vaughn was saying, reaching the children's favorite part, I looked down at that tiny baby boy, all wrapped up against the cold, and I lifted him up in my arms. He demonstrated with Thomas, who giggled as he was raised high. And I said, this here is a fine young man. A son any father would be proud of. And then you married Mama and became my real papa, Joseph concluded triumphantly. That's right, Vaughn agreed, setting Thomas back on his lap. Best thing I ever did. Later, after the children were tucked into bed, Savannah and Vaughn stood on the porch alone, his arm around her waist as they gazed at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't stopped that night? Savannah asked. Vaughn considered the question seriously. Sometimes, I might have built this ranch, might have made a success of it, but it would have just been a place, not a home. He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. You and Joseph and now Mary and Thomas, you made it a home. And you gave us shelter when the world had turned its back, Savannah replied softly. You saw value in us when others saw only shame. I saw the truth, Vaughn corrected. A brave woman doing her best for her child, a child who deserved love and a future. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, and a chance for me to be part of something bigger than myself. Savannah leaned into his touch. The children love your story, but they don't understand yet how unusual it was what you did. Nothing unusual about seeing a need and meeting it, Vaughn said simply. Most men wouldn't have stopped, wouldn't have helped, certainly wouldn't have offered a home and eventually marriage. Most men are fools then, Vaughn replied with a smile. Because I got the better end of this bargain, Mrs. Foster. He bent to kiss her, a kiss still filled with the passion of new love despite their years together. When they parted, Savannah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I have something to tell you, she said, echoing words she had spoken before. Vaughn drew back slightly to look at her face, understanding dawning in his eyes. Again, he asked, his voice hopeful. Savannah nodded, smiling. Dr. Miller says early spring. Joy spread across Vaughn's face, followed quickly by concern. Are you happy about it? 4 children is a lot to manage. I am, she assured him. Our family feels like it's still growing, still becoming what it's meant to be. Vaughn placed his hand gently on her stomach, still flat beneath her dress. Another Foster to help run the ranch, he said with satisfaction. Joseph will be pleased. Mary's hoping for a sister to even the numbers, Savannah laughed. And Thomas just wants someone smaller than him to boss around, Vaughn added. He pulled her close again. Whatever we get, we're blessed. They stood together under the vast Colorado sky, surrounded by the land they had nurtured and the home they had built, bound by a love that had begun with an act of kindness on a cold night years before. When a man had looked past judgment and seen possibility. When a woman had trusted despite fear. When a cowboy had lifted a baby and called him son. And in that moment of connection, that instant of recognition between two souls, a family had begun, one that would thrive for generations on the land called Foster's Rest, their story becoming legend in the valley, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and love.